Hi there, my name is Sarah and I am a research assistant with Sandby and the Sustainable Wildlife Economies Project. Today I will be presenting on whether to wildlife or not to wildlife, although don't worry, it's not that simple. I will be presenting some insights from wildlife ranchers and farmers from the interviews I helped conduct in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo for this project. Before starting with SWEP, I was quite idyllic when it came to wildlife. I mostly thought about wildlife in protected areas like national parks, and that's where they were wild and that's where they were conserved. But this project really opened my eyes to the economics behind wildlife and how there's so much wildlife and natural land on private property and in landowners' hands. And if it pays, it stays mantra really came to light. So this project presented a really unique opportunity because I don't think conservationist authorities would be able to talk to these landowners like we did. And we interviewed about 150 landowners, and I interviewed about one third of those, and we could really get some, desirable on the ground evidence based data that we so desperately need to inform policies. Um, but a lot of that, a lot of the answers that came up was actually, well, a lot of the experiences and things that the farmers and ranchers told us were not actually questions we were asked. So there was a lot of data that came up that wasn't, you couldn't put it into a graph like these. And so I thought I would take the opportunity to share some of the things that the farmers and ranchers said, and the experiences and challenges they're facing. And I also took this opportunity to ask them, why would they choose wildlife, or why would they choose livestock? And I was just really interested to see the differences there and why they did what they did. And I realized that it's not such a simple dichotomy. A lot of farmers are practicing mixed farming, or if they're practicing livestock, they have cattle fencing, which game can freely roam and jump over. So I realized there was a lot of overlap between the two, but also a lot of factors influencing both ranchers and farmers. And I hope that this will shed some light on that as well. So one of the themes I picked up from when I asked farmers or ranchers why they chose wildlife was the passion and the intrinsic value behind wildlife. Many ranchers enjoyed wildlife, and it was a lifestyle, a way of life. People love the natural environment, the bush, and the game industry is in their heritage, generational. They see the diversity of the land, and yeah, there's huge passion drive behind it. Another reason why ranchers chose wildlife was the management of wildlife. So they thought game was quite easy to look after, manage themselves. They didn't have to dip them like they do with cattle and livestock. And yeah, it was value for money. It was high returns when they came to maturity. Another reason was the wildlife economy. So before COVID and before the big bust with game prices being so low, the wildlife economy was actually quite viable. It's a really diverse industry. There's a lot of business models within the wildlife economy that you can tap into. Can be quite context specific. It's not viable now, but it will be viable, and a lot of farmers believe that, which is amazing. Um, and yeah, I found those three themes to be quite descriptive of why the farmers were in wildlife today. So moving on to why not to wildlife, as we know, COVID and the low prices and the bust of what happened in the past really have affected a lot of farmers today, to the point where ranchers are subsidizing their wildlife ranches with their livestock farms or their crop farms. And the industry is really not very enabling for them right now. And like they said, it's half non-existent. They're spending a lot of money on feed, and it's not worth the value of the species. It's just not a desirable place to be in right now, unfortunately. And of course the overregulation, the permits from tops. They feel really restricted by it, and it's really frustrating, and they can't do what they want to do, and there's just so many hoops they have to jump through that I think turn them off the idea of wildlife as well. Another reason, oh, sorry, this is meant to say why not to wildlife, was livestock. So at the moment, livestock is a shorter term return than compared to game. Right now, it's obviously it's a better investment because there's more value to livestock at the moment, and with livestock, you can put them in camps, so you can control them, and they're grazing a bit better than wildlife. But other than these dichotomies, I found that some ranchers and farmers were experiencing very similar things, like, for instance, with drought and fault carrying capacity. So, in the Karoo in the Eastern Cape, especially, they had been going through a really long drought, had lost all their grazing, and historical overgrazing also created quite a low carrying capacity. And then in areas like Limpopo, where you have high rainfall, but you have sour felt, you have to supplementary feed in winter. It was just quite a lot of environmental factors influencing how difficult it is to ranch or farm today. Another thing both ranchers and farmers experience are ticks and parasites, as well as predation by small predators and stock theft and game theft. These are things that ranchers and farmers both experienced, and we heard a lot about it, definitely. But I would just like to end off this slideshow in saying how much my eyes were open to the diversity of the wildlife economy, and how there is a lot of resilience and diversity with the mixed farming model. And I realized that people are having both livestock and wildlife, and you don't have to choose. And the wildlife economy might not be so forgiving now, but I think it could be in the future. And these like oscillations between livestock and wildlife, it's kind of moving quite short term. People have to make decisions. There's like a lot of money at stake, and therefore livelihood at stake. And it's not such a simple like transition. I think it's very weighted, and we just need to consider the fact that these farmers and ranchers are experiencing a lot of factors at once. And conservation can take on a form, with livestock on these farms or wildlife on these farms. I think there is room for both. So thank you so much. That is the end of our presentation.